In the history of pro wrestling, not every gimmick becomes legendary. Plenty of strange characters flashed across the screen for a moment and were then buried by time. Some repackages sounded wrong from the very start, and some personas showed up for only a handful of matches before disappearing like they never existed. Yet it's those seemingly forgettable faces that reveal the risk-taking, creativity, and even desperation of wrestling companies as they scramble to find something new. Today, we're digging up those failed reinventions and taking a closer look at them one by one. Let's jump right in. Wrestling Sphere, go. 1. Golga. Earthquake used to be one of the scariest monsters Hogan ever had to deal with. At one point, people were genuinely worried that his truck crash-level splash could seriously injure Hogan and put him on the shelf for a long time. After Hogan finally stopped his momentum, Earthquake teamed up with Typhoon to form the Natural Disasters, two massive, stubborn brutes who could steamroll the entire tag division and eventually captured the WWF Tag Team titles. He left WWF in 1994, drifted over to WCW, and joined the Dungeon of Doom, a stable full of over-the-top, cartoonish villains. But that run didn't last forever either. In 1998, he suddenly returned to the WWF. Only this time, there was no spine-chilling Earthquake name, no aura of a natural disaster ready to crush anything in its path. Instead, he showed up in a completely different form, Golga. If Earthquake was a natural disaster, built to flatten opponents, then Golga was more of a disaster for entertainment. He was put into the Oddities, a group of true misfits and freaks by design. Rather than intimidating anyone, Golga came out in a full face mask, with a round, wobbling frame, moving like a big, gentle giant dragged out there purely to amuse the crowd. His most obvious trademark, an almost unhealthy obsession with Eric Cartman from South Park. From the t-shirt with Cartman's face on it to the stuffed Cartman doll he clutched from backstage all the way to the ring, everything about Golga made him look like an overgrown fanboy who'd been accidentally dropped into a wrestling show. Every entrance, instead of the suffocating tension Earthquake once brought, mostly drew laughs at how absurd and out there he looked. Both Golga and the Oddities only stuck around for a short time, quietly disappearing in 1999 without any real accomplishments. For many younger fans later on, finding out that the terrifying Earthquake from back in the day was once turned into a big guy hugging a plush toy named Golga sounds more like a bad joke than actual history. But that's exactly what it was. One of the strangest repackages wrestling has ever seen, briefly remembered, then just as quickly forgotten. 2. Trucker Norm. If there were ever a Hall of Fame just for disaster gimmicks, Mike Shaw would pretty much have a reserved VIP seat. His whole career is tied to characters that make fans laugh and feel sorry for him the second you bring them up. In WWE, Shaw had to squeeze into the Bastion Booger getup, a sloppy, filthy slob of a character that made people in the crowd literally want to look away. As if that wasn't enough, he was also stuck playing Friar Ferguson, a wrestling monk with an equally bizarre presentation. But Mike Shaw's misery didn't start or end in WWE. Before that, in WCW, he had already shined under the name Norman the Lunatic. The character was introduced as an escaped mental patient, constantly shadowed by Teddy Long, who always carried a padded cell key with him. Anytime Norman even hinted at disobeying, Teddy would threaten to have him thrown back in there forever. The concept was already wild enough on paper, but WCW still decided to swerve one more time. So Norman the Lunatic suddenly got repackaged as Trucker Norm. In the storyline, they claimed Norm's late father had been a long-haul truck driver, and that somehow inspired him to follow in his dad's footsteps. An ex-mental patient being turned loose on society and put behind the wheel of a big rig, driving all over the United States. Just thinking about the legal side of that is enough to know something is seriously off. From there, Trucker Norm was billed as hailing from the highways of America, ditching the hospital gear for denim overalls and looking like a slightly out-of-place trucker who'd wandered onto a wrestling show. They talked about an endless journey, about a wandering wrestler living on the open road, but the act only survived a few TV appearances before it quietly disappeared. No real push, no clear direction, and Trucker Norm quickly became one of those repackaged gimmicks that most fans today have completely forgotten. 3. The Black Ninja. After a few years away from the ring, Terry Poach, who had previously wrestled under the name Terry Power in the US and Japan, was signed by WWE in late 1998. She was renamed Tori and first showed up on TV as an over-the-top female fan of Sable, playing the role of a scripted superfan. From that planted crowd role, Tori was quickly moved into the women's division and started wrestling regularly, showing up on TV almost every week. Not long after, she was paired with D-Generation X and presented as X-Pac's girlfriend. Everything seemed to be trending the right way until King of the Ring 2000, when Bubba Ray Dudley sent her crashing through a table in a wild spot, causing a torn labrum in her shoulder and forcing her out of action for the rest of the year. By the time she came back, DX had pretty much fallen apart, the spotlight had shifted to other names, and Tori no longer had a clear role. Not wanting to quietly fade away, Poach herself pitched a full reinvention, transforming into a masked, mysterious ninja with her identity completely hidden. Dressed head to toe in black, the Black Ninja lurked in the background at Raven's side, rushing in to help him during hardcore championship matches. Anything around ringside could become a weapon. The entire act revolved around two simple ideas. Help Raven hang on to the title and avoid having the mask pulled off, keeping a bit of intrigue alive for the audience. Finally, on an episode of Sunday Night Heat on March 11, 2001, Molly Holly yanked off the hood, revealing that the person underneath was Tori. There was no big follow-up push or major storyline after that. From that point on, she all but vanished from WWE television, only popping up briefly as a tough-enough trainer before being released, turning the Black Ninja into yet another repackaged persona that was quickly forgotten. 4. Saba Simba. These days, when Tony Atlas gets brought up, a lot of fans mostly think of the goofy backstage stories and his, let's say, unusual personal quirks. But in his prime, Mr. USA was a completely different image, a chiseled powerhouse, viewed as one of the trailblazers for black wrestlers. Together with Rocky Johnson, he formed the first African-American tag team to capture the WWE Tag Team titles, a very real milestone in company history. Away from the bright lights, though, things were far from glorious. Inner demons, bad choices, and a self-destructive lifestyle slowly dragged him down from the top. By 1990, Tony Atlas was no longer a headlining name with a packed schedule, but a broke, homeless man, curled up on park benches in Oregon just to get through the night. The muscle-bound superhero fans saw on TV stood in brutal contrast to the harsh reality of his life. Just when it looked like there was no way out, WWE unexpectedly reached out with an offer, pulling him back from rock bottom. Sadly, that second chance came wrapped in a persona that made people wince. Instead of letting Mr. USA return as a hardened veteran who'd survived his struggles, the company slapped a new identity on him, Saba Simba. He was presented as a man who had reconnected with his roots by joining a tribe in Uganda, wrestling barefoot and behaving like a wild native. Every appearance had Atlas in a feathered headdress, clutching a wooden shield and long spear, a caricature that reeked more of racial stereotyping than any genuine celebration of culture. On a personal level, it's hard to blame Atlas for accepting the role. When the choices are a ridiculous character or another night sleeping in the park, the decision is basically made for you. But from a creative standpoint, it was a forgettable repackage, brief, shallow, and destined to fade. Today, most fans barely remember that there was ever a Saba Simba who passed through WWE history at all. 5. Who? Among all the guys who kept getting fired, rehired, and somehow wandering back into WWE for another paycheck, Jim Neidhart is pretty much the poster child. No matter how many times he screwed up or caused problems, the door to the company was rarely slammed shut on him, largely because Godfather Stu Hart kept picking up the phone, calling Vince McMahon, and asking him to give the Rhino one more chance. For Vince, it was partly about respecting the Hart family, and partly about trying to squeeze a bit more shine out of a once-beloved name. Because back in the 80s and early 90s, Big Jim was no mid-card scrub. As one half of the Hart Foundation alongside Bret Hart, Neidhart was a cornerstone of the entire tag division, a powerhouse with a roughneck style, that trademark ha-ha-ha laugh, and the look of a walking cinderblock. But when WWE agreed to bring him back in 1996, nobody really knew what to do with him. Neidhart was no longer a fresh star on the rise, but he also wasn't legend status where just walking through the curtain would get a huge pop. Out of that confusion came a so-called master plan, called Who. At its core, this was just an excuse for Vince McMahon to stage his own wrestling version of Abbott and Costello's classic, Who's on First? Routine. A wordplay gag from the 1950s awkwardly shoved onto TV in the middle of the new generation era, when the company was still trying to figure out its identity. In theory, commentators could ask, "Who's wrestling right now?" and get the answer, "Who?" then go back and forth with the bit. In reality, the crowd mostly just sat there, stone-faced. Neidhart was covered head to toe in a gold mask to hide his identity, but one look at that thick frame and body hair and anyone paying attention knew exactly who it was. Jim absolutely hated this character. He felt like he was being trotted out as a public punishment for his past screw-ups. There was no direction, no real storyline, just a one-note joke stretched out for a few extra minutes of airtime. And thankfully for the Anvil, who disappeared just as quickly as he showed up, a few random appearances and then gone, so forgettable that even longtime fans often barely remember it happened. As for the question, whose ridiculous idea was this, anyway? The answer, of course, belonged to who? 6. The Con Man. For a long stretch down in Ohio Valley Wrestling, the name Rob Conway was pretty much synonymous with background guy. He was everywhere, working dark matches before TV, popping up on B-shows like Velocity, occasionally playing a security guard, an extra, whatever the company needed that week. Rob was like a handy puzzle piece, plug and play, always available, but almost nobody was truly paying attention to him. The turning point came in August 2003, when he got paired up with Rene Dupree and later Sylvain Grenier to form La Resistance. The anti-American trio actually caught fire for a while. Regular TV time, tag title runs, and tons of heat from the crowd. But like most tag acts, once management decided the formula had run its course, La Resistance was broken up, and Rob was nudged into a singles run with a freshly upgraded persona. That's how the Con Man was born. On paper, he was supposed to be a cocky, swaggering player, dressed like a bargain bin superstar, sideways cap, sunglasses, tight mesh tops, almost like a knockoff Buff Bagwell. Conway leaned hard into the arrogance, the smug body language, carrying himself like a big-time heartthrob, but the problem was, hardly anyone bought into it. When he walked through the curtain, the reactions he got were mostly polite at best. WWE tried feeding him a few legends, hoping that rubbing shoulders with big names would raise the stock of the Con Man. But unlike Randy Orton or even Eugene, those feuds never gave Rob enough momentum to break out of the pack. Once the office ran out of patience, they went back to the usual script, a long losing streak, sliding further and further down the card, and eventually disappearing from TV altogether. The irony is that Conway actually had almost all the right tools. A solid athlete's build, decent in-ring ability, a pretty good look, and on top of that, one of the catchiest entrance themes of his era. Yet there was always this invisible gap between him and the audience, the kind of vibe where you look at him and think, he's fine, but why should I care? The Con Man definitely wasn't a successful repackaging, but at the very least, Rob Conway kept doing things his own way, or, fittingly, the Conway. 7. The Sultan. It's time to make a change. That was the slogan Fatu shouted in the mid-90s. On paper, it sounded great. A Samoan wrestler reinventing himself as a positive role model, telling kids to stay away from violence and drugs. The problem was, nobody could have guessed that his next change would be turning a Samoan guy into an Arabian prince called the Sultan. A total reinvention, just in a direction no one could really understand. The Sultan came out wearing a mask that covered his whole face, like WWE's version of Sub-Zero, with a thin ponytail sprouting from the top of his head and the sides completely shaved. From a distance he looked dangerous enough, but the longer you watched, the stranger it felt. He never spoke, always keeping an icy, expressionless demeanor under the mask. The in-story explanation was simple and unsettling. His tongue had been cut out, so he physically couldn't talk. It sounded dark on paper, but they never really explored it, so it became more of an off-putting detail than an intriguing mystery. The Sultan debuted at WrestleMania 13, which should have been a huge springboard for the persona. Instead, the crowd reaction was lukewarm at best. They didn't hate him, but they didn't love him either. They just didn't care. After that, the Sultan was slotted into a feud with Rocky Maivia, the hot newcomer at the time, for the Intercontinental title. The outcome was easy to predict. Rocky went over, while the Sultan slid straight down the card and eventually vanished from TV as if he'd never been there. Fortunately for Fatu, his repackaging journey didn't end there. After the failed experiment with the mask and the Silent Royal act, he was completely rebooted as Rikishi, a big blonde-haired Samoan in shades who famously used his backside to punish opponents. This time, everything clicked. Rikishi got insanely over and became one of the most recognizable names of the Attitude Era. As for the Sultan, he's basically just a bizarre little chapter in Fatu's career that most fans have completely erased from memory. 8. Coach Buzz Stern. Ray Lloyd, a wrestler from Georgia, spent years stuck in background roles. In the late 80s and early 90s, he bounced around the independents and occasionally showed up on WCW TV just to take quick losses. The name Ray Lloyd didn't exactly stick in fans' minds. In 1996, a huge opportunity came when he was chosen to play Glacier, a character inspired by Mortal Kombat, basically a Sub-Zero knockoff. WCW poured serious money into his debut. Icy ring gear, mask, blue lighting, blizzard effects. Glacier was even plugged into a storyline with Mortis, Wrath, and Ernest, the Cat Miller, looking at first like a full-on mega push. But the further things went, the more Glacier lost steam. Once the initial spectacle wore off, the persona no longer fit the overall tone of the show and he slowly slid into the role of high-end enhancement. Still getting TV time, but mainly there for others to beat. Eventually, Glacier vanished from television, leaving behind a pricey experiment and a gimmick remembered more for how odd it was than for any real success. In August 1999, Ray Lloyd came back with a new identity, Coach Buzz Stern. Facing the risk of being let go, he paid about $8,000 out of his own pocket to film a series of vignettes introducing Stern, a grizzled, old-school coach who lived and breathed strict discipline. That idea alone was what saved his contract. As Coach Buzz Stern, Lloyd brought in Luther Biggs as his prized student. On TV, Stern constantly yelled at and berated Biggs every time he lost, pushing him through brutal training sessions and turning them into a duo that was equal parts funny and pathetic. Even so, this run only lasted a few months before both men were released in a round of budget cuts. Yet another repackaged gimmick that quietly faded into obscurity. 9. Mr. Hole-in-One. You've got to admit, it's pretty hard not to like Barry Darsow. Backstage, everyone talks about him as this easygoing, good-natured guy who's always laughing and chatting with everyone. In the ring, though, he was a true chameleon, constantly trying on new personas. Some of them hit big, some of them crashed and burned, but they were never boring. The man who once wrestled as Crusher Khrushchev is best remembered for his run as Demolition Smash, standing side by side with Bill Axe Eadie and dominating WWE's tag scene with some seriously impressive title reigns. When Demolition eventually split up, Darsow kept reinventing himself. He made another mark as Repo Man, a sneaky, grinning collector who repossessed anything he could get his hands on, before heading over to WCW. There, he slipped into the role of the Blacktop Bully, a menacing truck driver who caused chaos both on the highway and inside the ropes. The infamous blade job at Uncensored 1995 got Darsow fired, but a few years later he quietly resurfaced, this time wrestling under his real name. By late 1998, Darsow transformed, yet again, this time into Mr. Hole-in-One, a heel golfer that, personally, I always felt was the kind of character wrestling had been missing. He'd come out in a neat polo shirt, flat cap, and carrying a golf bag, walking down the aisle like he was headed to a PGA event instead of a wrestling match. Mr. Hole-in-One would often make a generous offer. If his opponent could sink a putt, he'd willingly give them the victory. And almost every time, the second they got excited and let their guard down, he'd flip the script and jump them from behind. This was clearly a comedy-leaning act, designed more to add flavor to the undercard than to chase championships. Mr. Hole-in-One mostly drifted around B-shows like Saturday Night and Worldwide, popping up here and there before fading away again. After roughly half a year, Darsow quietly put the golf clubs away for good, leaving behind yet another quirky repackaged persona that most fans today have just about completely forgotten. 10. The Governor. After WCW shut down, Shannon Spruill's career pretty much slammed into a dead end. WWE had no interest in signing her, so she was forced to drift around the independents, taking whatever random bookings she could just to stay in the business. Every now and then, Spruill would pop up in the early days of TNA, but those appearances were brief and forgettable. It wasn't until 2008 that she was finally brought back to TNA full-time. And this time, what fans saw was completely different from anything they'd known her for before. Spruill didn't return as Daphne, the unhinged gothic scream queen that fans were used to hearing shriek her lungs out. Instead, she was handed a brand new persona, the Governor. This was TNA's attempt to cash in on the media frenzy surrounding Alaska Governor Sarah Palin, who at the time was running for vice president and all over television. Palin's look and mannerisms had already become prime comedy fodder for Tina Fey on Saturday Night Live, so TNA saw an opening and jumped into the mix. To her credit, Spruill absolutely nailed the role. So much so that a lot of fans didn't even realize it was Daphne at first. From the hairstyle and walk to the way she talked and all the little hand gestures, everything about the governor felt like a parody version of Palin that had walked straight out of real life and onto a wrestling show. The character was quickly folded into a storyline with the beautiful people, showing up not only in backstage skits but also working actual matches, so it wasn't just a one-off joke gimmick. The angle lasted for about 4 months before wrapping up with a segment where the beautiful people cut the governor's hair, symbolically erasing the character. After that, Spruill dropped the politician act and went right back to being the deranged Daphne everyone knew. Looking back, the governor was a gimmick born at exactly the right moment, riding the wave of that specific political and media climate. But because it was so tied to that era, once the Palin craze cooled off, most fans practically forgot there was ever a governor stepping into a TNA ring at all. 11. Furface. If Ed Leslie isn't the all-time record holder for changing gimmicks like changing clothes in wrestling history, then I honestly want to meet the person who beat him, just to check if they're okay. The list of personas Leslie has played is exhausting just to read: Brutus, the barber, Beefcake, the butcher, the man with no name, the Zodiac, the booty man, the disciple, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. To WWE fans, Leslie is almost permanently tied to the barber image, the smiling babyface with giant shears, chopping off opponents' hair after a match as a form of humiliation. But there was a brief stretch where he experimented with a completely different role, one that was mysterious and so bizarre that almost nobody remembers it today. After a horrific parasailing accident on July 4, 1990 that severely damaged his face, it looked like his career was over. Yet in early 1991, Leslie suddenly returned, playing a masked figure in outfits that screamed, "Something's not right," from the moment you saw him. No introductions, no Titantron, no promos, just a strange, fully covered man quietly showing up out of nowhere. That persona would later be referred to as Furface, or the Mariner. His job was incredibly simple. Wait until the end of a match, music hits, he sprints to the ring, wipes out the heels with a few punches and maybe a headbutt, then disappears backstage as fast as he arrived. No explanation, no motives, no dialogue, like some bargain bin superhero who wandered onto a wrestling show by mistake. The funny part is, on TV the commentators almost never called him by name, nor did the company make any serious effort to turn him into an important piece of the program. Furface / the Mariner popped up a handful of times and then was quietly dropped after some wrestlers and office people started worrying that Leslie might risk re-injuring himself if he kept taking heavy bumps. In the end, WWE scrapped the whole mysterious sea creature sailor idea and put Leslie back in the Brutus Beefcake role with his legendary talk segment, The Barbershop. And like a fleeting bad dream, Furface / the Mariner was buried deep in the archives of history, surviving only in the memories of the most dedicated fans who love digging through the past. Do you remember any other failed repackaged gimmicks that made you laugh or shake your head in disbelief? Drop them in the comments, hit like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our other crazy behind-the-scenes stories.